Hello, everybody. I am Jax James, NORML's State Policy Manager, here a little bit late on Tuesday to go over some of the newly filed and moving legislation that is across the country. I spent the day down at the Austin Capitol talking with legislators about medical cannabis, penalty reduction, and more. And so I'm definitely excited to talk to you guys about a lot of the other states that have moving legislation as well. So if you're watching, I encourage you to comment where you're watching from. The blog that I posted and the updates I'm going to give are having to do with legislation that was either just filed or had some type of movement this week since I talked to you guys last week. So if you want me to dive into what's going on in your state, make sure to comment below where you are watching from. So this week is another busy week. It's been really busy here at NORML. Thousands of bills have been filed and introduced since the end of, well, actually since mid-November. And we have been dedicated in looking at them, vetting them, tracking them, monitoring them, and creating these action alerts. So in the states that have started pre-filing, and some states have started even holding hearings. And so there's a lot of good news in this update. Specifically, we're going to be talking about Connecticut, Hawaii, Indiana, Iowa, Maryland, Minnesota, Mississippi, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Utah. So just like a couple little states have a few things going on. But what I want to start off with first, as you guys comment where you're watching from, so I can come back and circle back to any questions you have. But what I want to talk about first is Connecticut. So in Connecticut, the sales of legal cannabis flower and cannabis products started earlier this month, and home cultivation allowances will begin in July. Adults can currently possess up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis flower or an equivalent amount of cannabis concentrates in public, and up to 5 ounces of cannabis in their private residence. Additionally, state law prohibits police officers from using the smell of cannabis as a pretext for a search. Now, unfortunately, Connecticut has been filing bills that we don't like. So two bills have been filed, both of which NORML opposes. House Bill 6094 would actually repeal the Adult Cannabis Use Act in Connecticut, therefore ending the possession of an illegal market for cannabis in Connecticut, a regression that's previously been unseen in any state that has legalized for adult use. So if you live in Connecticut, I definitely encourage you to share your opposition to that effort. Additionally, there's three bills, HB 5460, HB 6268, and SB 232, which seek to restore the ability for law enforcement to use the odor of cannabis as a basis for stop and or search of a person and their vehicle. So if passed, this would repeal this restriction that they have currently where cannabis-related stops and searches cannabis is not a pretext. So again, this is a change back to bad policy that we would like to not see happen. So we encourage you, if you're watching from Connecticut, to participate in our opposition to this bill. Next, let's talk about Hawaii. Down in the islands, Hawaii has a medical cannabis access, and under state law, cannabis is decriminalized, but low-level possession up to 3 grams remains a civil violation, resulting in a fee of $130. Incoming Governor Josh Green has been supportive of the legalization of cannabis for adults, and thus this kind of raises the expectations that lawmakers can move forward on the issue this year. So House Bill 237 and its companion Senate Bill 375 would legalize cannabis for adult use. Those 21 and up would be able to purchase the equivalent of 4 ounces of cannabis within a consecutive period of 15 days. Adults would also be permitted to cultivate at least or up to, 10 plants at their home residence. Additionally, there is HB 238, which provides medical card holders in the state of Hawaii protection against employment discrimination based solely on their medical cannabis use. Employers will be able to use a fit for duty test for medical cannabis qualifying patients in potentially dangerous occupations with certain exceptions to that. Then there's SB 440, which seeks to approve in-vehicle receipt of medical cannabis and medical cannabis products on or near the premises of dispensaries. If passed, the bill would allow medical patients to go do a drive-through dispensary and allow medical patients to place an order at the dispensary to go and pick up. Additionally, Senate Bill 464 removes penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana. And if passed, the bill would repeal criminal penalties for petty misdemeanor offenses, redefining the limits of marijuana possession and fines in the state of Hawaii. So we have quite a few bills in Hawaii that are available for those of you who live there to participate in supporting. I'm going to come over to the comments real quick and see where you guys are watching from. So we've got St. Louis, Missouri. Awesome. You guys are in a session right now, and there is moving legislation. Also, just recently passed the adult use of cannabis through the ballot initiative process. So as I go through the comments, I will mention anybody who's watching here, if you go to norml.org/act, you'll see all of our federal actions at the top there. And then you'll see a dynamic map of the states, and you can hover over your state and it will pop up the current legislation in your state. So if you want to check that out while you're watching the stream, sure, feel free to do that. Dallas, Texas. So Texas hasn't had any newly filed bills or movement this week, but I'm happy to give a little rundown once I've gone over all of the new and moving legislation. We've got Virginia, South Carolina. I've got some updates for you. Utah, I've got some updates for you too. Awesome. So great to have you guys joining us. All right, let's talk about Indiana. House Bill 1263 and Senate Bill 237 both wish to create a medical cannabis program in Indiana. HB 1263 would permit the use of medical cannabis by people with serious medical conditions as determined by their physician, while also instituting patient protections. Senate Bill 237 would permit the use of medical cannabis by those with qualifying conditions or a serious medical condition that their doctor deems could benefit from the use. It also permits qualified patients to possess 8 ounces or less of dried cannabis and home cultivate up to 12 plants. Then we've got Senate Bill 70, which seeks to amend the law so that possession over 1 ounce is a Class B misdemeanor, while possession of lesser amounts are no longer a criminal offense. House Bill 1297 seeks to decriminalize simple possession of less than 2 ounces of cannabis in the state of Indiana. So we have both medical and decriminal efforts that if you live in Indiana or you have friends that do, you can participate in. Then we've got Ohio legislation. I keep saying Ohio. It is Iowa, you guys. I said that twice. It is Iowa. We're going to talk about Iowa now. Senate File 73 seeks to legalize possession, manufacturing, delivery, and retail sales in Iowa. Under the proposal, those that are 21 years and older could possess 30 grams of flour, 5 grams of concentrates, and 500 milligrams of THC-infused products. Non-residents could permit half or would be permitted to possess half of that amount, and no more than 1 ounce of marijuana or its equivalent would be able to be sold per transaction at a retail establishment. It further stipulates that it is illegal to have cannabis in a driver or passenger area of a vehicle on public roads or highways, thus meaning that vehicular travel with cannabis must be done with the cannabis confined to the trunk space of the vehicle, including when delivering cannabis. In cases of 1 ounce or less, cannabis delivered or possessed with the intent to delivery with no remuneration shall not be prosecuted. So if you wanted to exchange or trade or barter with a friend per se, you would be able to do that as long as no money changes hands. It further institutes certain parental and tenant protections. So some good legalization efforts in Iowa. Now in Maryland, as you guys know, Maryland recently passed the referendum effort to legalize cannabis in their state, and now they're coming back this legislative session and dealing with some statutory issues that they'll have to deal with. I'm going to be going over 3 different bills all of which will be having hearings in the beginning of February. So the first is Senate Bill 88, which would require that certain records relating to convictions of cannabis possessions would be completely pardoned by the governor and that they also be automatically expunged. The bill would also establish the procedure for automatic expungement of pardoned individuals with cannabis possession convictions, and the bill would take effect from the date it is enacted. SB 88 is scheduled for a hearing in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee on the 2nd of February. Then we have Senate Bill 73, which would substitute civil penalties in the place of criminal penalties for certain offenses related to manufacturing, cultivating, possessing with the intent to distribute cannabis products outside of the regulated market. So instead of those being criminal, they would be civil. And that SB 73 has a hearing in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee on February 1st. Then there's SB 51, which would amend statutes relating to the determination of reasonable suspicion and probable cause with regard to cannabis possession in the state of Maryland. And SB 51 has a hearing in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee on the 2nd of February as well. So if you live in Maryland, you can definitely participate by sending your support for these efforts and potentially even offering testimony when they go to hearing next week. Then we've got Minnesota. Minnesota has a legalization bill that has been moving fast. HF 100 and SF 73 would allow adults 21 and older to purchase up to 2 ounces of cannabis and to home cultivate up to 8 plants, 4 of which could be mature. In addition to creating this system of licensed private businesses, municipalities and counties could also own and operate government dispensaries. Those with prior marijuana convictions on their records would be automatically expunged, and the legislation also would allow for on-site consumption lounges and cannabis delivery services. Further, it contains languages banning the sales of unregulated synthetic cannabinoids, which is consistent with the Board of Pharmacy rules that were put into place last year. Lastly, the legislation seeks to promote social equity and inclusion among licensees by prioritizing licensure to underrepresented populations, such as those who maybe live in low-income neighborhoods, military veterans who lost their status because of a cannabis-related offense, or some other type of situation. So the House bill, HF 100, has passed 2 House committees and was scheduled for a hearing today in the Environment and Natural Resource Finance and Policy Committee. That is a long committee name. I believe that the hearing has concluded. This bill has moving fast, so I would not be surprised if a further hearing is going to happen shortly. So if you live in Minnesota, definitely stay tuned to what we have going on there. I'm going to come back to the comments real quick and see what are you guys up to? What are you up to over here? Not too many comments yet. Awesome. I still see a few states that you guys are watching from. Thank you for joining. Okay, so let's talk about Mississippi. House Bill 598 would provide that a first offense of simple possession of 30 grams or less of cannabis and 10 grams or less of synthetic cannabinoids would be a civil offense and not a criminal offense. If passed, it would take effect on July 1st of this year. Additionally, Senate Bill 2414 would reduce the punishment of simple possession of small amounts of cannabis to a civil penalty. If passed, the bill would impose a $100 fine on those who possess 30 grams of cannabis or less, and a fine of $100 and not more than $250 for possession of 10 grams of synthetic cannabinoids or less, rather than the current criminal penalties. Additional legislation in Mississippi, SB 226 and SB 227, seek to allow qualifying patients. I'm sorry, let me say this again. Seek to allow those with qualifying past marijuana-related convictions to petition the court for expungement. Under this bill, the court has the power to administer up to a $50 fee for the petitioner to file their claim, and if passed, the bill would allow for citizens to file for a petition with the court if they have a possession charge under or equal to the legal limit of medical cannabis in the state of Mississippi. Further legislation, SB 2296, mandates that the odor of cannabis alone does not provide law enforcement officers with probable cause to have a warrantless search of a vehicle, home, or other private property. So those 4 or 5 bills I just went over in Mississippi, you'll find action alerts for all of those over in the blog. Let's talk about Nebraska. Nebraska's got a couple good bills coming up. LB 634 would legalize the adult use of cannabis. And for those 21 and older, they would be permitted to possess up 1 ounce of cannabis flower or its equivalents in cannabis products and home cultivate up to 6 plants. It additionally institute pathways for expungement of records of individuals that have been convicted of a nonviolent cannabis offense. Then we have LB 588. It would create a medical cannabis program in Nebraska. The legislation would create a program where qualified patients could purchase and possess up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis flower or 2,000 milligrams of THC concentrate. It additionally would offer some protections to patients while prohibiting the smoking of cannabis. So both a legalization and a medical bill out of Nebraska. Now, New Hampshire is another state, kind of like Minnesota that I mentioned, that has quite a few bills that are moving. We talked about the employment protections one last week, but this week we're going to focus on some different legalization bills that are scheduled for hearings both tomorrow and on Thursday. So HB 639 would allow you to cultivate up to 6 plants and authorizes a new standalone cannabis commission to regulate the production and sales with oversight by an independent advisory board. Then HB 344 would allow adults to possess up to 3/4 of an ounce of cannabis, 5 grams of hashish, and certain infused products. It legalizes home cultivation of up to 6 plants, of which no more than 3 could be mature. Then HB 643 would authorize the Liquor Commission to regulate cannabis and administer sales to adults and patients. Home cultivation would remain prohibited. HB 544 seeks to authorize the Liquor Commission to regulate and administer sales to adults and patients. Home cultivation, again, would remain prohibited. Then HB 360 would legalize the possession and use of cannabis for those over 21. It would strike most of all of the current references to cannabis and marijuana from the state's Controlled Drug Act, amending the statute to provide for safe and legal possession and consumption for those over 21. So HB 639 and HB 544 are scheduled for hearings in the House Commerce Consumer Affairs Committee tomorrow, the 25th. There's a link if you would like to support the legislation, not only through an action link, but for this one, there's actually even the opportunity for virtual testimony submission. Additionally, HB 344 and HB 360 and 343, so many numbers. They are scheduled for a hearing in the House Criminal Justice and Public Safety Commission on Thursday. And additionally, you can support this legislation through the action alert provided or through the link where you can submit virtual testimony. Next, let's talk about New Jersey. There actually is a bill out of New Jersey that we oppose. Senate Bill 3438 seeks to create a potency cap on THC concentrates, allowing no more than 30% for cannabis flower and 60% concentration for solid or liquid concentrates. So if you live in New Jersey, you can help oppose that bill. In New York, SB 2263 protects medical cannabis patients from eviction based on their consumption of cannabis. So that's important legislation out of New York. Oklahoma has 2 bills. Senate Bill 440 would impose THC potency on marijuana products and prohibit licensed medical marijuana dispensaries from selling medical marijuana products that exceed these limits. The bill states the medical cannabis limits cannot exceed 30% Delta 9, 60%, or let's say this again. It's It's a lot of limits, you guys. I don't know why we need to put limits on things. 30% Delta 9 THC for medical cannabis, 60% Delta 9 THC potency for medical products, and 2% Delta 8 potency for medical products, and 0% potency for Delta 10 THC and all other variations of THC for medical cannabis products. If passed, this bill would become effective on January 1st. Additionally, Senate Bill 1012 seeks to offer drug testing exemptions for school employees that are medical marijuana patients. So that is another important bit of legislation. As you guys know, South Carolina had two medical bills that were authored. A third one has been put forth. So this would allow not only for the use of medical cannabis, but would also create numerous protection for registered patients, caregivers, and physicians. There's additional legislation out of South Carolina, HB 3486, which seeks to authorize cannabis for medical use, but would create some criminal penalties for driving under the influence of cannabis products. So let's move on to Tennessee. There's actually quite a few exciting bills out of Tennessee. HB 172 would create a medical cannabis program. Qualifying patients would be able to possess 2.5 ounces of flower and 2,000 milligrams of cannabis-derived products for medical patients. HB 309 would seek to decriminalize the personal use quantity of cannabis by making possession a civil violation punishable by a $25 fine or community service. The bill defines personal use quantity, because that's kind of vague, as 1 ounce or less of cannabis, 5 grams or less of concentrates, and infused products containing 1,000 milligrams or less of Delta 9 THC. Current law in Tennessee states that possession of up to a half ounce of cannabis is classified as a criminal misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in jail and a maximum fine of $500. Additionally, there's two bills, Senate Bill 168 and House Bill 88, known as Free All Cannabis for Tennesseans Act. And it would create this regulated market for those 21 and up to possess and transport no more than 60 grams of cannabis flower and 15 grams of concentrates. Further, the bill would allow for cultivation of up to 12 marijuana plants at your residence, and the legislation also has equity provisions for disadvantaged and veteran-owned businesses with pre-existing hemp licenses. Additionally, there are consumer protections that make nonviolent, non-felony marijuana offenders eligible for immediate release from incarceration, probation, or parole, and the bill would take effect on January 1, 2023 if passed. Last two bills that I would like to go over with you guys are out of Utah. House Bill 204 would protect the rights of parents to be a part of the medical cannabis program, and it would do so in part by banning the administration of certain types of drug tests. Then HB 72 allows medical cannabis pharmacies to deliver to qualified and state registered patients. So two bills to support out of Utah. So I saw that we had some people. Let me just navigate over here. Sorry if it's making my my view here a little wobbly for you guys. But I did want to take the opportunity to go over some of these bills here in Texas because I was just at the Capitol building. So I'm going to take a point of personal privilege on that. So if you go to texasnormal.org, click on the 88th Ledge tab right there, you'll be able to see a summary of all the bills that have been filed, our legislative goals, and then there's 3 action alerts that you can participate in. One to support medical cannabis, one to support penalty reduction, and one to support legalization. So there so far have been 3 medical cannabis bills, SB 121 and SB 127. Both would let doctors decide who should be a qualified patient and creates protections for medical cannabis patients and caregivers. HB 1200 would authorize the use of medical cannabis to patients who have a qualifying condition or whose doctor deems it beneficial for their condition. It would further remove the THC cap of 1% by weight and would allow for home cultivation while also containing certain patient and parental protections. Now, there's quite a few penalty reduction bills. Some of them address penalty reduction for concentrates like HB 127, SB 87, and HB 1347. There are quite a few, but the one that I really want to highlight that kind of does the most and is a bit of our priority legislation is HB 218 by Rep. Moody. This would address reducing the penalties for not only possession of cannabis flower, which is currently a criminal misdemeanor where you can face 180 days in jail and a $2,000 fine, but also for cannabis concentrate, which even a drop of in Texas is a first-degree state jail felony. It would also instruct officers to no longer make arrests for personal possession amounts of either marijuana or related paraphernalia, and it facilitates a process for the expungement of past marijuana convictions. So definitely very important legislation there. Now, there is a Senate bill, SB 209, that has been put forth that would legalize cannabis in Texas. It would allow those 21 and up to possess 2.5 ounces of cannabis flower and 15 grams of cannabis concentrates with home cultivation of up to 12 plants, while also instituting parental protections and for legal cannabis consumers. Then I want to talk real quick in Texas. So in Texas, we can't collect signatures and put something on the ballot at the statewide level to change, our drug laws, because our drug laws are managed at the state level here. We have to go through the legislature, and you can go through the legislature through regular legislative process of a bill, or you can also go through with what's called a joint resolution. And there is one of those authored and would put a referendum on the ballot. All right, I want to come over here to the questions. We've got Minneapolis, Minnesota. We did go over some of the exciting legislation moving quickly in Minneapolis, or excuse me, Minnesota. But I am going to, I guess, not too many questions on the legislation today, but great to see where all of you guys are watching from. And thank you for taking the time for tuning in today. I will be back next week with a new update on newly filed and moving legislation across the country. So thank you so much for tuning in, friends, and I look forward to seeing you next time.